All right, good afternoon, Alex Sanger Elementary School. Thank you all for being here today at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. You guys are all in the 5th grade, is that correct? Yes! Okay, that's excellent. This must be the entire 5th grade from the school, is that correct? Yes! All right, excellent. Well, I'm so glad that you guys could be with us here today at the site of the assassination of President Kennedy. How many of you have ever read a book or looked at a website or watched a documentary about the Kennedy assassination? Okay, so most of you. Yeah, it happened 55 years ago, but it is still an event that we are talking about and learning more about all the time. My name is Stephen Fagin. I'm the curator here at the museum, and this is one of my favorite programs to present. It's called Living History, and it gives us an opportunity to talk to an individual or individuals who have a direct link to the moment and the memory of the assassination and have a very interesting story to share from that weekend. And so it's my great pleasure to be joined on the stage here by Jan Sittel, sitting right next to me, and Dr. Betty Duke-Ruhd. Please join me in welcoming these ladies to share their story with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, excellent. How many of you out there are sitting next to a good friend today? That's excellent. Because you know what? These two ladies are sitting next to each other, and they were very good friends at the time of the assassination. In fact, you can put your hands down now. In fact, they have been friends for 57 years. Think about that. Think about when you get to be older and you have a friend who you have known for over half a century. That is a really remarkable thing. Let me show you what these two lovely ladies looked like at the time of the assassination. Here they are. Yeah. So as you can see in this picture, they were attending Thomas Jefferson High School, which was on Walnut Hill in Dallas. Students just like you were, a little bit older than you are right now. They were 16 years old in 1963. You guys are 10 or 11?
Yeah.
Okay. So not too much older than you guys were at the time of the assassination. Now let me see if you guys know who we're looking at here. So on the left, who do you think that is? Which of these ladies do you think that is? You think, how many of you think it's Jan right here? Okay, how many of you think it's Betty? Okay, I'm seeing the same hands go up for both ladies, so you're hedging your bets here. What we're on the left here, that is Jan. That is Jan Sittel. There you go. Which means on the right-hand side is Betty.
Yeah.
Now, Betty, let's talk about your hair for a minute.
I know, isn't that the greatest hair you ever saw in your life?
How early in the morning would you get up to make your hair look like that?
Well, that was our senior picture, so we had hours to work on it, to go to the photographer. And I went through, we had our 50th anniversary, our reunion, and I went through our yearbook, and I had the biggest hair at Thomas Jefferson High School that year. So thank you.
I'm glad you guys are being so enthusiastic, because for some people, if you put their high school yearbook photos on the wall in front of an audience, that would be the stuff of nightmares. But in this case, it's working out very nicely. Now, Betty, I think you've told me that you would actually wrap toilet paper around your hair?
Yes. That if you wanted to have your hairdo for a couple of 3 days, you'd wrap toilet paper around it and sleep like that, and take the toilet paper off, and you'd have that beautiful hair.
There you go, a good grooming tip for you guys if you ever want to have 1960s style hair. Let's talk about that time period and the hairstyles, because as I understand it, Mrs. Kennedy, the president's wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, was very influential as far as the way young ladies wanted to dress and the way they wanted to wear their hair. Was she an influence to you, Betty?
Well, indirectly, I think she influenced fashion through our mothers, who in turn influenced us, and it was just a pervasive feeling that you wanted to be like Jackie.
Jan, would you say that the Kennedys were more like movie stars than politicians?
Yes, we all thought of them that way. They were a beautiful family. They were an active family. The president was so much younger than the previous presidents, and he was so much more active. And you could see him on TV, you could see him in the newspapers. He made trips to Europe, he did all kinds of things. And Jackie rode horses, you could see her out jumping fences on her horses and sailing on the sails around Cape Cod, and it was marvelous to watch them.
At that time, the transition was from Dwight Eisenhower, who had been a World War II general, and he was the oldest president in American history at that time, and he was succeeded by John F. Kennedy, who was the youngest man ever elected president. He was actually the first president born in the 1900s. Prior to Kennedy, every other president had been born in the 1800s and going back, 1700s. So this was something new and exciting, and it seemed to particularly affect young people because they saw this as a passing of the torch, as Kennedy himself said. So you were inspired maybe to become more politically aware at that time?
Well, it was just, he was a new generation, and we were a new generation. And it did inspire us. It was exciting to learn about him in civics class in school, and he made you watch the government more.
So Friday, November 22nd, 1963, both of you have the chance to see President Kennedy in person, but you weren't together that day. So you have very unique individual stories. And chronologically, we'll start with you, Jan, because you went out to Dallas Love Field very early that day to greet the Kennedys when they landed in Air Force One. Tell us a little bit about that morning and what the atmosphere was like.
Well, that day in school, I was in the choir, and so the choir had to go in early at 7 o'clock that morning to TJ to practice for our upcoming Thanksgiving program, and then start school. Well, we wanted to go see President Kennedy so badly, myself and 3 other friends in the choir, and somehow our parents agreed to let us skip class, leave school, go out of school. I mean, this was monumental that they would let us do that. So one of the parents came and picked us up after choir practice, went out to the airport. We got there about 8:30 in the morning, and Love Field was smaller then, and as you faced the terminal, to the right, there was an enclosure with a fenced-in enclosure, and right where the tarmac ended, where the planes would come up. So we all went in there, and when we got there at 8:30, there were only like maybe 10 or 12 other people there. We were there so early. So we all got places at the fence so we could see the president and started waiting. And while we were waiting, we were rained on, but we were waiting out there. And after a while, some people came around with signs that you could hold for the president, to honor the president. And I was able to get one of those. And so I was standing there with my sign and just looking around, looking up while we were just waiting there. You could see officers on top of the terminal with their rifles waiting for the president's plane to come in. And you just had this feeling that they were trying so hard to make it so safe for the president to come. And
we actually can see you in this photograph. This is pretty cool. I'm going to circle Jan Sittel. See her, that little tiny circle there towards the bottom on the fence line? She's turned away from the camera. Here, I'll go back and recircle it so you can see. See where that circle pops up on the screen there? That's where Jan Sittel is. I'll even go one further, and right there in the center with those glasses, smiling directly into the camera, that's Jan right here, waiting that day, November 22nd, to see President Kennedy. Yeah, that's worth some applause there.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
The fact that we have photographic proof that you are telling the truth. Now, Jan, we can see a little bit about what you're wearing. It was a little bit of a chilly day. Tell us about the coat that you were wearing.
Well, at that time, everybody had raccoon collar coats.
Made from real raccoons.
It was a real raccoon. And there were television shows where they had the Davy Crockett raccoon hat.
Coonskin cap.
Coonskin cap. So everybody had raccoon.
So the rest of the raccoon not used in the coonskin cap would be the collar of these very nice coats.
Went on the coat.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting artifact. Would you guys like to see it? Yes. Yeah, I would too. We have here Jan Masterson from our collection staff, and we have brought out of our collection the actual raccoon collar coat that Jan Sittel is wearing in that presentation, or in the photograph there. So Jan's going to stand right here for a minute so the cameras can see it. And then she'll walk it a little bit closer. Please do not touch it. It is older than your grandparents, probably.
Like that.
But it's in remarkably good shape. And it looks like it's very warm. I would have enjoyed wearing that Monday or Tuesday this week.
It was, yeah.
It is, it's extraordinary for a textile, for an artifact like that to survive all these years in such good condition. And Jan donated that to our museum last year, so it's part of our collection. And we're so thrilled to have it. Jan, how did you, what thought went into your mind that I'm going to save this coat for half a century?
Well, I wore it through the rest of high school, and I wore it when I went to college. So I wore it for a long time. My mother wrote my name in it so I wouldn't lose it. So and then when I got out of university, I just put it in a closet, and there it sat.
And there it sat. A historic artifact
Yeah.
that is now in a museum, now being handled by gloves because we have to take good care of our artifacts here. And there's something else you're holding up. If you look in the picture, you're holding up a sign all the way with Jack, and it says Grassroots Dem, meaning grassroots Democrats, hardcore Democrats. You saved that sign, too.
I saved the sign, and there's a reason.
Let's take a look at the sign here.
Okay.
Here it is. Tell us about the sign.
Well, when we were out there waiting behind that fence, waiting for the plane to land, some people, and I got the impression that they were from SMU, came out with a bunch of signs, and they were handing them out, and I was able to grab this one. So it had a stick on it that you could hold it. So I took that off. So
Wow. And did you necessarily know what grassroots Democrats meant?
I thought they were green.
Thought they were green?
Green, yeah.
Green.
I had never heard of grassroots Democrats before. That was the beginning.
Well, that's extraordinary. A lot of these signs turn up in our photographs, but believe it or not, the one you're getting to see today is the only sign from Love Field that we have in our collection, which is pretty extraordinary. And Jan, thank you once again for adding these unique artifacts to our collection, because they really do help bring us closer to that moment in time, don't they? I mean, you can can't reach out and touch it, but you can look at a really important piece of history from that day.
Well, I'm so glad I had a place where it could go.
Oh, yeah.
And to be appreciated.
Let's jump back one photograph to that earlier picture where we can see you there in the crowd. Now, I'm seeing a flag up on top there, the Confederate battle flag, which is a somewhat controversial, well, it is a controversial flag today, but you guys know a story behind that because that actually relates to Thomas Jefferson High School. Tell us about that.
I'll let you start.
Well, we have since researched and found out that that was not a Thomas Jefferson student.
Okay.
That was a display of the Confederate flag, but it was one of those things where it's hard to explain. You know, you hear a lot about people that want to resurrect the South, resurrect the glory of the old South, and the battle flag is that one is a kind of a symbol of that. And 57 years ago or 54 years ago, that would have been a symbol of Southern pride. But since that time, there's been a very firm civil rights movement, and that is no longer a symbol of Southern pride as much as it is a symbol of we don't care, the South will rise again, and it's really deemed part of a racist attitude. So this guy with the Southern flag is probably the Southern pride person and has no inkling of a stab at Kennedy, a stab at civil rights, and I don't want to apologize for it, but I thought you'd be interested that we found out that it was not a Thomas Jefferson rebel.
That is
person.
interesting,
Yeah.
because for context here, Thomas Jefferson High School in those days, actually up until 1972, that was your school flag, was the Confederate battle flag, and your football team of the Rebels, and that was your symbol. So all this time we thought that was a show of school spirit, but it's a little something different. And I guess we'll never quite know what was going through the mind of the man who brought that flag to Love Field, but many who don't know the backstory see that as a a dig at President Kennedy because in June of that year, about 8 months earlier, he had been part of a televised national address taking a very firm position on the civil rights movement, which was not popular in the Deep South. So some might view that as a political protest. But that gets to the bigger question of how flags and statues can be important symbols that people infuse a lot of meaning into that can mean a lot to somebody, but it can also be very offensive to others. So I did want to point that flag out. Now, Jan, let's get to the big moment because the Kennedys arrived, Air Force One arrived, and they stepped off the plane. Walk us through what happened next.
Okay. Well, we were, by that time, I had been separated from my friends because all the adults coming into the fenced-in area were pushing us kids out of the way. So we had to work our way back up to the fence, and we got separated doing that. So I tried to stay up closest to where the tarmac was, and when Air Force One came in, the tip of the wing just went right over our heads. And we were just, everybody was screaming and yelling, that entire crowd in that fenced-in area. And I don't know how, it was totally full. It was packed with people. And screaming and yelling, it never stopped. And the door opened, they brought up the stairs for everybody to come out of the plane, and Jackie came out first, and she was absolutely gorgeous. And the sun was shining then, it had stopped raining, the sun was shining. She came down, and then President Kennedy came out. And the sun hit his hair, and the first thing I thought was, he doesn't have dark hair, he has sandy blonde hair. But at that time, it was black and white TVs, it was black and white pictures and everything, and his hair always came out dark. So here I am, and looking at his hair, because it just stands out. So he comes down, there's a welcoming committee at the foot of the stairs, and they give Jackie her red roses, and everybody's talking and welcoming the Kennedys to Dallas, and Vice President Johnson and Lady Bird come up, and they drive the limos up, and the limos are open because it's sun shining now, and they stop this limo just a little ways from where I was standing behind the fence, and I was thinking, I'm trying to hold this sign, and if they walk in front of us, everybody's just going to go crazy. So I take the sign and I stick it down in between me and the fence to protect the sign so I don't lose it. And sure enough, after all the greetings were done, the president, instead of walking over to the limo, breaks off and comes over to the fence and starts shaking hands with everybody. And this whole time, people have been yelling and screaming, welcome to Dallas, welcome to Dallas. And it's just, I'd never been in anything like this before. And when he came over to the fence, this crowd just surged. And all of us standing at the fence just bent double over that fence because everybody behind us were pushing us over. And I was just thinking, please, fence, don't fall. Don't fall. But after that first surge, we were able to pull up, and you could see the president coming down the fence. And I was just looking at the expression on his face. And, of course, we were yelling and screaming at the top of our lungs. And, I mean, that's just what you do in Texas. You show your emotion. And I thought, well, maybe growing up in New England, growing up in Massachusetts, young people didn't do that. Maybe they were more refined because the president looked like he just, how in the world do I relate to this? So he was just blown away. He couldn't believe all of this emotion for him. So he kept coming down, and as he got closer to me, all of a sudden all these hands start going past my face, and it's the people behind me putting out their hands to shake hands with him. And that was weird. But he got to me, and right in front of me, shook his hand, looked at him. He was fantastic. And then he was moving on down the fence, and I saw the man that was right behind him. The president was moving to his left, and this man was on his right. And I looked at his face, and it was just grim, and he was gritting his teeth. He was really grim. And I looked down, and he had his arm in a fist, his hand in a fist, and his arm in front of the president, between the president's waist and the fence. And this was a Secret Service agent that was there. If somebody tried to do something over the fence, he was there to protect the president. And that was something to see. But they moved on down. Then came Jackie, and she was reaching in and taking as many hands as she could, and all this, welcome to Dallas, and she was saying, thank you, and then LBJ.
She was wearing gloves, right?
And she was wearing gloves. Oh, gosh. And then LBJ and Lady Bird came, and still the same cheering, yelling, and the people, when LBJ came up, people started saying, welcome home, it's good to see you, welcome home. And LBJ was saying, well, thank you, good to be here, thank you. And so everybody walked down, and the president and the first lady broke off first and went to their limo, and the vice president went farther down the fence than the president did. So more people were able to shake hands with the vice president, and then he got into the limo, and then the motorcade left.
A very upbeat and almost inspiring morning for you at Love Field. Sounded like everything was going just great.
Everything was fantastic. Everybody was so happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a little bit further down that parade route on Lemmon Avenue, you were waiting for your chance to see the president. You got out of chemistry that day and had a little bit of problems with that. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. It's a typical school story. We were having our 6 weeks test in chemistry that day, and the teacher said, if any of you people want to go see the president, you're going to get an F on your 6 weeks exam. So I bit the bullet and went ahead and left, and sure enough, I got an F on my 6 weeks test and ended up having a C for that 6 weeks.
This is even after the president is shot and killed.
I got the C.
You still got that.
I got the C, yeah.
And we should point out that in Dallas schools, it was considered an excused absence with a note from your parents.
Right.
But this chemistry teacher,
right,
maybe not a Kennedy fan, possibly?
I'm not sure. It's just the autonomy of the classroom teacher back in those days was just unshatterable. And what she said went, so... That was okay.
I don't think that would fly here in 2019.
No, it wouldn't fly now. Would it fly with your teachers to give you? No, of course not. Of course not.
There would be open rebellion, I suppose. But you did miss school, and
yes.
I hope you consider it worth it all these years later.
Absolutely.
That C in chemistry.
Absolutely.
You got a very close view of the motorcade. We're going to jump to a picture now showing roughly your vantage point there, Lemmon Avenue.
Yes.
Walk us through what you observed as the car went by.
Okay. Just back up a little bit. My dad had gotten up very early that morning and had studied the route of the motorcade, and he figured out that the very best place for us to be would be in a parking lot close to Lemmon and Oak Lawn. Now, in that time, he said, we've got to avoid the crowds downtown and at the airport. It's going to be a mass of humanity. So sure enough, there were just a sprinkling of people that were along that parade route, but it seemed to be a really good vantage point. And I wanted to remind you guys that at that time, Lemmon Avenue was a 3-lane street with the middle being the turning lane. And so they're coming down the right lane, and if I'm let's pretend that I'm on the curb, and this is the right lane, and of course they were kind of going down the middle. So if you can see this brick right here, that's where the right-hand side of the car was from where we were standing. We had gotten there, and you could feel this electricity and this murmuring and this really awesome experience, and you couldn't really see the motorcade yet, but you could feel it. You could feel the electricity of it. And then the first thing was the Dallas police motorcycle escort coming down. And then, like Jan's experience, right before the motorcade came down, there was this beam of light, this beam of sunlight. And just as President Kennedy and Jackie were coming down, And I was real impressed with the hair too. But I remember it being redder than that. But anyway, he's coming down, and we had seen before the motorcade a whole contingency of kids from the Holy Trinity Catholic School, and they'd come down the street. The nuns and the priests had lined the kids up with the older kids, and it was like a stair step. They really were cute, though, when you think about it, but they were on the other side of the street. And so I went, uh-oh, this is trouble. And sure enough, when the Kennedys were coming by, they were immediately drawn to these really cute kids in a stair step. And I just, for some reason, my adrenaline just shot up. And I thought, I'm not going to get to see their faces. And so this is where the sound is going to be bad. So I'm right here, and let's say you're President Kennedy, and I go, President Kennedy! Like that. He looks over, and he says, oh, hi, how are you? And of course, Jackie's still gogging over the kids and everything. And so I'm kind of starstruck at that point, and I'm going humming, fanning myself. And it was like President Kennedy spoke to me. Now, I'd have passed out if I had shaken his hand, probably, but he spoke to me, and then the motorcade went on. And I remember my heart, and I'm feeling the actual feeling that I felt then. My heart was just pounding, and I'm probably red-cheeked. And so my dad was standing there, and I said, Daddy, I think probably I can say now I've seen a president of the United States. And he said, well, honey, you might have seen 2 presidents. And I was going, what? He said, well, there's LBJ in that car. And I went, oh, yeah, that's true. And I kind of dismissed that. And that kind of haunted me later on in the week that I had seen 2 presidents. Accidentally.
Was that your Thomas Jefferson rebel yell that you were?
You know, that was just me yelling.
Okay. All right.
I have such a booming voice.
Well, these wonderful personal moments, and then of course the motorcade heads further on into downtown Dallas, down here to Dealey Plaza, right where we are today, and things change dramatically. The two of you had these very unique personal connections. You got to shake his hand. You got to yell at him, and these moments which only draw you closer to a person you already clearly admire.
Right.
What was it like for you to find out news of the shooting? How did that happen?
Well, when after we left the airport, one of the mothers picked us up and took us to their house, where we were going to have lunch and then go back to school. So we drove up. It took us about 20 minutes. We left after 12 noon from the airport, and it took us about 20 minutes to get to the house. And when we drove up in the drive, my friend's grandmother came running out the back door, and she just yelled, "The president's been shot." And we were getting out of the car, and we were thinking, what's going on? I mean, we had just seen this incredible, healthy, smiling, happy person had touched him, and now he's been shot. So we ran into the house, piled in front of the TV set, and watching. It was switching back and forth between local news and Walter Cronkite and other major news sources. And then we heard, we were just sitting there watching TV, and we heard Walter Cronkite come on and say, "The president has passed away." And we were just, you can't go from being so happy, so absolutely just everything was just so wonderful to see this president. And then you learn that he's, an hour later, he's dead. It just hit us. And the people of our group that were farther down the fence that didn't get to shake the president's hand, but they shook Johnson's hand. One of the friends said that they were sorry that they didn't shake a president's hand. And then one of the persons in the room turned to that other friend and said, because we knew that Johnson was in Air Force One. He had been sworn in, and he was flying back to Washington. And this person turned to the other person and said, "You did shake the hand of a president. It was Betty. It's just like Betty's situation." And I remember this friend saying, "Yeah, I guess I did." I mean, that was just, the whole thing was a shock.
Betty, what about you?
Well, I was thinking about how when you're a teenager, you're just pumped with all kinds of hormones, and everything's more exciting than normal, everything's sadder than normal. You laugh at things just because you want to laugh. And Jan was right on it. When you go from that exhilaration, that high of being so excited that your heart's going to pump out of your chest, then all of a sudden you hear this news and you want to see it. And my dad and I were coming back from a restaurant, and we got home to watch Walter Cronkite talk about him being dead. So we'd heard on the radio that he had been shot, and I don't know if I can even describe it to you. I've lost my parents, I've lost loved ones, I've lost people that were very close to me, but that is the saddest I have ever been in my entire life. And like I was telling you before, that excitement pumped up in my chest whenever I was thinking about seeing him, you just get so sad. And that sadness went on for weeks, because you have the sadness of the actual hearing of him being dead and shot, to when you go, and that Sunday when they were taking Oswald to a different facility and you see that, and you think you're numb to the sadness, but you're not. Then Thanksgiving Day, the next week. And I think that that's one thing I want you to remember about this experience for yourself, is the entire country was clouded in a shroud of despair. And even people that didn't like Kennedy knew that they better not say anything and show respect. And it'll be a feeling, a national feeling, and a feeling for Dallas, Texas, that has never, ever, ever been repeated, thank the Lord.
Many of you in this audience today, as young as you guys are, you may have experienced loss yourself, friends or family members or grandparents that have passed away, and the kind of grief that you feel from that. If you can amplify that to a national, to a global level, and imagine everyone feeling much the same way you did. These are moments, these touchstones that happen only occasionally in history. The Kennedy assassination was one. Maybe to a lesser degree, the explosion of the Challenger in 1986, 9/11, of course, which you guys were too young to remember, but September 11, 2001, that was another moment of intense global tragedy that really brought people together in a unique and profound ways. And that's one of the reasons we're here today, over 55 years later, talking about that, because by sharing these personal stories, we give you guys a chance to get a sense of what it was like to live through that period. And for folks like Jan and Betty, it gives them a chance to reflect on their own lives and the impact it had on them. So everyone benefits from therapeutic type programming like what we're doing here.
It is therapeutic, yeah.
Betty, you mentioned Lee Harvey Oswald in custody. I want to wrap up that weekend, because the assassination of the president, as if that wasn't enough, that was just the beginning of a series of things that weekend that shocked the entire world. Lee Harvey Oswald, who worked here in the Texas School Book Depository, he was arrested, and then on Sunday, after the Friday death of President Kennedy, on Sunday morning, while he's in the basement of police headquarters, handcuffed to a police officer, a local nightclub owner named Jack Ruby jumps out and shoots Oswald on live television. First murder, broadcast live on American television. You may have seen it downstairs in the video we show. This was another tremendous shock. And then just the day after that, the funeral for President Kennedy. The high-profile funeral procession in Washington, D.C., the burial at Arlington National Cemetery, the lighting of the eternal flame. as young women, 16 years old, processing this, people who had seen Kennedy live in person, what on earth were you making of the death of the alleged assassin and the funeral in Washington?
Well, the death of Oswald, the capture of Oswald, was just phenomenal. We had been to movies at the Texas Theater in Oak Cliff, and to think that that's where he was captured. And the funeral of Kennedy was the first time I had seen something on TV like that, seen something actually moving down the street. And one thing that really stood out for me was Blackjack, the horse that was there as the symbol of the fallen rider. And that, I remember him.
John F. Kennedy Jr., the president's son, his third birthday was on the day his father was buried. And so the famous photograph you see of little John Jr. saluting his dad's casket, that's taking place on his third birthday. It was a moment that just broke the hearts of millions around the world, and it remains this instant memory link to that moment of the assassination and the funeral. The picture I have on the screen is kind of an interesting photograph that we have in our collection. It is just a living room in Anywhere, America, and there's a little tiny black and white TV propped up on a stool or a ladder with chairs all around it. And I guess friends, family members all gathering around this living room. They put the little tiny TV as high as they could, and if you look really closely at the screen, you can see the flag-draped casket. This is the funeral playing out live on TV that day, and this is how someone in a living room somewhere in this country experienced it, just like the two of you. You mentioned that it took a while to recover from the assassination. Was there anything in particular that helped remove a little bit of that sadness?
Yeah.
What was that, Betty?
Well, I do want to mention that friendship here with Jan, we were in front of the TV and watched the Apollo 11 moon landing and Neil Armstrong on the moon. But the big thing that we did as friends was we went to see the Beatles in concert in Dallas. And it seemed like that when the Beatles started touring the country, it was when everybody got kind of out of their funk, and it was like, wow, and it was really exciting again, 16-year-olds. And we're starting to get out of, life as usual, that kind of thing.
How many of you have ever heard of the Beatles, the band The Beatles?
Yeah, of course.
Excellent. Please make it a priority to go on iTunes or wherever and listen to a little bit of that Beatles music, because it could change your life forever. They were a very influential band from the 60s. But Betty, psychologists have said the exact same thing. President Kennedy is killed in November of 1963, and in February of 1964, the Beatles, this big British rock band, they come to America. They appear on a major TV show, Ed Sullivan, and the country is just captivated by their upbeat music at that time, very upbeat music. And it was, in many ways, this balm, this healing patch that was put on the wound of the Kennedy assassination for so many, particularly of your generation, because I think you'd agree that the assassination of the president was a moment which really defined your generation.
It did. I did want to mention one other thing that we haven't talked about, Stephen, but Dallas, Texas had a bum rap after the assassination, to the extent that people would say that they were from Highland Park instead of Dallas or something like that. And I remember, and this just came across my brain recently, the Dallas Cowboys couldn't go anywhere. They were an organization without getting booed and jeered and things thrown. You just think the Philadelphia fans are mean. They would throw things, and I'd forgotten how hard that was. And there are some memoirs that people have written about just by osmosis and by just being from Dallas and having the name Dallas Cowboys, that they were pretty well, blamed. And people from Dallas, even though it was not true, you felt blamed for some reason. And there's a headline out there on one of the magazines that said, "Did Dallas kill President Kennedy?" And that was a question for historians for years about the climate in Dallas, the anti-Kennedy climate, if that maybe contributed to the atmosphere. But we've since realized that Lee Harvey Oswald, if you believe he acted alone, had an agenda that was well above the climate in Dallas. And so I just feel like that's silly to blame Dallas for any of it.
You guys are from Dallas. You're in the Dallas ISD. If a tragedy happened in Dallas and the rest of the country said Dallas is responsible as a community, and you traveled somewhere outside of Dallas and people treated you badly or said negative things to you, how would you feel about that?
Bring
You
'em
guys,
on.
this group over here is ready to fight.
Yeah.
Which might not be the answer, but still, it would probably make you feel angry, right? It would make you feel angry, sad, resentful. These were very real emotions that people after the assassination felt. Well, I want to give you guys a chance to talk to our speakers today, Jan and Betty, and ask them questions that we haven't covered about what they experienced and how it made them feel, where they are today in their lives. So we'll cover as many of these as we can, and since we're recording, I'll repeat the question into the microphone. So just raise your hand if you have a question for Betty, Jan, or both. Yes, ma'am.
How long did it take for the whole country to recover after what happened?
It's a good question. The question was, how long did it take the entire country, not just the two of you, not just Dallas, but just in broad terms, how long do you think it took the country to recover from the Kennedy assassination?
Well, it's still being talked about. So,
It's true.
Maybe it
It,
never went away.
yeah,
It never went away.
it was a huge tragedy. And people read about it and study it, and it will just continue.
I will say this as far as the local stigma. When our Dallas Cowboys football team started winning the Super Bowl and became America's team in the 1970s, that helped quite a bit because when you have great sports success in a city, it tends to take away or erase a little bit of that negative stuff from the past. And also something you guys have probably never heard of, but there was a big internationally famous television series in the 70s, 80s, and I think on into the 90s called Dallas. And there was an oil man named J.R. Ewing, and it was a very dramatic show about oil and banks and money and all this stuff in Dallas. It wasn't really a realistic depiction of Dallas at all, but what it did was it changed the narrative. It changed the narrative from JFK to JR, and suddenly you had new people coming along who were very much invested in that cultural depiction of Dallas and less interested in the assassination. So several things. You can put your hands on many different aspects of this. Yeah, young lady in the back there. Yes, ma'am. Whatever happened to Mrs. Kennedy, the president's widow? Okay, good question. Do you want to take that, or do you want me to do it?
You're so good.
Yeah.
Well, Mrs. Kennedy moved to New York with her children, tried to keep a very low profile, even though we were at the age of the beginning of what became known as the paparazzi, the way the news folks, the cameramen would follow and try to capture all these intimate images of these celebrities in isolation. Mrs. Kennedy remarried in 1968. She married a Greek shipping tycoon named Aristotle Onassis. He also passed away. Mrs. Kennedy spent the remainder of her life living in New York. She actually became an editor for Doubleday Books and was very involved in local historic preservation there in New York. And sadly, she passed away. She contracted cancer, lymphoma, as I believe, and died in 1994, if I'm correct. So, and the president's children, since we talked about John Jr. saluting his dad on his 3rd birthday, very sadly, he died 20 years ago this year in a plane crash in 1999. The president's older daughter, Caroline, is still alive today. Yes, they're on the front row. Say that again for me. Is the, what here, rifle? Is the rifle here with us? We do have downstairs, and hopefully you guys had a chance to see it, we do have an identical Mannlicher Carcano rifle, an Italian-made rifle from the same production year as the rifle found here in the building. The thing about that rifle, just like the bullet shells, and just like the original boxes, that was all crime scene evidence. And so that was all taken to Washington, and it's all now in the National Archives. So what we have are replica boxes based on the originals, and we do have a 1940s rifle, identical, the same exact Japanese type scope mounted on the top, the same homemade leather sling. The rifle downstairs looks as close to the original rifle as you can get without having the original out in front of you. But that's a good question and a challenge that our museum faces when we look at original artifacts. Let me go on this side, the lady with the cat ears back here. Oh, that's a great question. Question was, were you mad when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald? Were you angry about that?
Shocked.
Shocked more than probably angry, and just bewildered why they couldn't bring Oswald to justice through the courts. So
Neither of you felt like he got what he deserved, or any initial
No.
emotions like that?
Not
So many
really.
had those feelings.
No. It was so soon after he was arrested, and such little information had been released to the public about this man. He was allegedly the shooter, and he denied it. The one little time he had a chance to speak, he denied knowing anything about it. So you weren't that into the emotions of that moment. For me, I wasn't.
Let's go way over here to the other side of the room. Yes, ma'am. Great question. That is an awesome question. Did the assassination impact or influence what you did with the rest of your life, your career?
well, I was interested in government, and my career was in the Foreign Service, working for the Department of State. And I was able to spend 27 years overseas. And at one time, this just happened, I was in Tokyo. I was posted to Tokyo, and this was, 1986, 87. And I was in a taxi, and the Japanese driver said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "The United States." And I said, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "Dallas." And he said, "Oh, the first international television program that we had was the Kennedy funeral that they received from overseas." So I was thinking about government work.
And you were an educator for about 40 years.
Almost, yeah. The only thing I can say about being personally influenced in a lifetime was the fact that that experience bonded my family together in a way that is rare. When you go home and you play your Xbox and do your homework and then maybe say, "Hi, Mom, hi, Dad." But it was such a bonding experience for my family that I was really family-oriented, probably more so than I would have been otherwise, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So.
Very good. Young man in the far back there.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think?
What ifs?
Yeah, well, the big what if. What do you think would have happened in the country in the 1960s had President Kennedy lived, likely run for re-election in '64 against Barry Goldwater, probably won? What do you think would have happened, maybe? Any ideas?
Well, I think there would have been more work about Cuba. And President Kennedy went to Berlin, and that's when he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." So I think there would have been international work, international studies, perhaps some changes there. It's hard to, of course, the Soviet Union was still running things then, so there could have been some changes.
My perspective on that is that I believe the Vietnam War would have come across very differently, because JFK was known for wanting to limit the support for the South Vietnamese. There is a whole generation of people that are your grandparents' age right now that, more so than the Kennedy assassination, were influenced by the trouble, the way the country was polarized over the Vietnam War. And that would have probably etched a different American culture. That polarization is very apparent today, but we got comfortable taking sides, and I think the Vietnam War influenced that. So that's my read on it.
We have time for just a couple more questions. Yes, ma'am, right there. Okay, good question. Did you ever-
Cool.
did
I
you-
can tell a story that's
Okay.
great.
The
You
que-
don't even know this.
Oh, well, I love
Will you
stories
repeat
like
the
that.
question, though, please?
Yes, the question
Thank you.
was, did you ever meet or encounter anyone that was not a fan, did not like President Kennedy?
Well, our entire school was pretty anti-Kennedy, but I misunderstood the question, and I want to tell this story. I was at a campaign rally in 1964. We'd been invited by some friends of ours, and our neighbor was a state representative, and we got tickets to a rally for the man that was running for Congress. And Jan didn't know this originally, but we were seated at the head table, and it was around, and my lunch partner was John Connally, the governor of Texas. And you talk about being starstruck, and I, met him and shook his hand, and then I sat and went, oh my God, that's where the magic bullet went through his hand and out his thigh and in the street and hit 4 or 5 people,
Or not.
Or not. And so that was my follow-up story on that. But yes, we were, this area is very conservative. It's very Republican, and it was that way in 1963 as well.
Yeah. And John Connally later switched parties and became a
Republican,
Republican.
as a result, then went bankrupt.
All right, back there in the far back. Yes, ma'am. Where is John F. Kennedy's grave? It is in Washington, D.C. at Arlington National Cemetery. There is an eternal flame. In fact, I was just there last summer, and I've been there several times, and it's a meaningful event. Regardless of what you think about President Kennedy, regardless of how you feel about a conspiracy or a lone gunman, being there at the president's gravesite, infused with all this unfulfilled hope and promise that he represented, it's a powerful, powerful thing. And if any of you ever have the chance to go to D.C., I would encourage you to spend a few minutes at Arlington National Cemetery. Yes? Were there any arguments after the president's death? I bet there were a lot. Do you want to narrow it down? Are you talking about like what happened or? Okay. Excuse me. Yeah. Questions began being asked about the Kennedy assassination almost immediately after it occurred. In fact, some of the first references to a possible conspiracy theory, I think, emerged within just a month in December of 1963. And since then, we have thousands of books, hundreds of documentaries, lots and lots of theories, some of which can be debunked. We offer a program where we debunk some of them, but there are others that can't be, that offer these truly intriguing, lingering questions. It's one of the reasons why we're here. It's one of the reasons people continue to talk and discuss and debate this event. This is an ongoing topic, and if you go online, read some books, be careful of the websites and where the information comes from, but you guys can go into this glorious rabbit hole of information and may never emerge from it like me. You may be in there for the rest of your lives studying and being involved in this event. I understand that we are out of time, but did you guys like this program today? Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to say one quick thing.
Go for it.
Okay,
Betty
one
has something
quick
to say.
thing.
Hang on.
Living history, boy, isn't it fun to be alive living history. And you all have so many people in your lives that you never have conversations with. So visit with your great aunts and uncles, with your grandparents, your parents. Ask them about topical things, not did you drink in high school. Don't ask them that, but ask them about what was it like in 9/11. Have you asked your parents what was it like in 9/11? Nice. Very few.
And as a coda to that, record those stories. Pull out your iPhone, record it on audio, do a video, because these are precious, precious recollections. You know how many oral histories we have in our collection here at the museum? Somebody make a guess, a wild guess. We have over 1,000. Not 100,000. All right. We have over 1,800 recordings in this collection with people from all over the world sharing their stories, and you can find many of them on our YouTube channel, stories just like Jan and Betty have told us today. Thank you guys so much for being our guests today. We appreciate your time.